We're talking about the Vampire Diaries. You guys guessed it. This is the video. Months of research, of watching. I said I would never cover this show. I said it was too long, and I was wrong. I can admit when I'm wrong. I had to watch this show. It happened for a reason, and here we are. Welcome to my Vampire Diaries series. Today I'm talking about how the writers massively failed Bonnie Bennett. And right now as I'm saying this, I just had vivid flashbacks to my video about Emily Fields from Pretty Little Liars. And I think I called that video How the Writers Murdered Emily Fields or something like that in my Pretty Little Liars series, because these two stories are remarkably similar. Because I remember watching Pretty Little Liars and feeling as if Emily Fields was being sidelined and not given good storylines, which really was very tone deaf, considering that she was the only member of the main cast who was visibly biracial, and it was really empowering and uplifting for so many women to see themselves represented, and yet her stories were a massive letdown. And the similarities between that and Bonnie Bennett in the Vampire Diaries is insane. So today we're talking about how the cast and the writing, not the cast, but more the writers, the showrunners, mistreated Kat Graham, and how their issue with her very much came through in the writing and the kinds of storylines she was given and the various ways that she was basically told to be smaller and undermined. And then the overall evolution of Bonnie throughout the show and what I thought of her character as a whole. And then the general big problem with the Vampire Diaries, which I noticed. So this is my first video in the Vampire Diaries series. I have indeed been watching the show and absolutely loving it. So let's get into it. And remember to subscribe before we do to see the rest of this series. I love this show. That's the first thing I've got to say. I love it. I've got many positive videos coming soon where you'll see where I will talk about how it is one of the best shows I've ever watched. So I mean no ill will. I don't mean anything like bad or hateful when I criticize this, but I have a platform. I know the power of my voice, having a platform and making loads of videos about the show and just not saying anything about this topic and skimming over it would feel really wrong to me, especially because I literally couldn't help noticing it in the show. It's so blatant. It's like they're not even trying to hide it. Like they have no shame, and how they just disrespect Bonnie's character to the point that when I was watching the show around season 4, I was actually uncomfortable. I was like, man, they're not even trying. Like I can see it. It's so obvious. So Bonnie deserves her moment to shine. I'm obsessed with her. Sure, she's got her problems. She can be annoying. She can be entitled. But the other characters in the show are deranged. And Bonnie is by far the most selfless, well-rounded one. And so I thought she deserved her own video. She deserved a moment in the spotlight too, because she's been crushed down for long enough. And there's a reason why she had such a big fan base, even when the showrunners tried to give her worse storylines, or, you know, could have utilized her more and didn't, even if it wasn't intentional, because she still managed to shine despite that, because she's just such a great character and she just did so much for the show. It wouldn't have been the same without her. The first thing I need to address is the black best friend trope and the whole black savior complex thing they try and slot Bonnie into as like this stereotype. It really bothers me, because you might notice in a lot of shows that you have like the black best friend who's there for tokenism and there to make them look like they're being representative, but then that character doesn't really do much, or they're just very like much a stereotype without their own personality. Or if they're not doing that, often black women in shows and the media, you'll notice, are made very loud, aggressive, or they're just turned into the strong woman who doesn't really have a sexuality. It's more about her being there to lift up the white characters. What can she do for them? How can she be of service to them, basically, and carry the whole world on her shoulders? So she's not really allowed to just have a romance and be sweet and maybe have good things happen to her and be really embracing her femininity and just living that soft life. No, she's very much like, you're going through trauma. And unfortunately, you see Bonnie slotting into both of these tropes, which is, again, just a really bad move on the writer's part. And this is the first segment I want to address, which is that it's just darn annoying. I mean, the amount of times that these characters are meant to be Bonnie's friends, but all they're doing is just asking her for help with spells. The amount of times there's a problem. And Bonnie's just this amazingly talented, powerful witch. So the only way they can fix it is by getting Bonnie to do a spell, because Bonnie's a witch. And so the vampires are constantly coming to her for help, not to just ask her how her day is, but just purely how can we use her, regardless of if it puts her in danger or if she says, guys, I just want to stay out of this. I mean, in the early seasons, it felt like they were defending her a bit and trying to avoid using her, but by the final seasons they're just blatantly coming to her whenever they need something. And what is even more aggravating is how Bonnie herself time and time again puts others' needs above her own, and then the show paints it as heroic and noble, when in fact it's literally bordering on like suicidal, because it's like she has a death wish. And I mean, of course it's good to be, you know, selfless and help people out, but not when it's continually putting your own life in jeopardy. And she's just constantly sacrificing herself for the well-being of others, and then not complaining. Like, she won't complain, she'll suffer in silence. And it just doesn't feel right that she never really puts her foot down and says, okay, I've had enough. Aside from one time with Damon around like season 6, the rest of the time she just kind of puts up with it. I really started to question how much these characters actually cared about her. For example, Stefan comes to her with a problem, he asks her to do a spell, and she's like, wait, something's wrong. And he says, with Elena? And she's like, no, with my magic, like something's wrong with my magic. And he's like, oh. But it just showed that he didn't really care about her. He just wanted to check Elena would be okay. And she's often just doing things to help Elena. And that's the whole reason her Grams died even, was because her Grams was trying to basically help her help Elena. And as a result, her Grams died. And this is another thing with this whole savior thing, is it's at the risk of Bonnie's happiness and her mental health. And she is continually put through loss. More than other characters aside from Elena, I would say Bonnie's put through loss. The difference is that when, let's say, Caroline goes through something, she's allowed to grieve, as is Elena. Whereas Bonnie, when she goes through something extremely traumatic, they don't even spend a few episodes developing that or showing the impact it has on her. She just leaves the show to process it in silence for a few episodes, or we move on. For example, her dad being brutally murdered in front of her own eyes is never given any attention, and it seemed like a really nasty way to just put Bonnie through more pain. You can think about the death of her grandmother, which traumatized her. Basically every boyfriend she's ever had, she's lost. And the depression, the PTSD that she would have been struggling with was very much overlooked, even when it was clear that actually she really seemed to be struggling with depression and thoughts of ending her own life in the prison world. And it was heartbreaking because I loved her Grams. Their relationship was one of my favorites in the show. It was really beautiful. And it was obvious how much Bonnie was in heartache about it even seasons later, and just really terribly missed her grandmother. And it wasn't until about season 6 that Bonnie was finally allowed to be more present in the story, have her own stuff going on. But that was only really because they had to get rid of Elena.
And also, Bonnie, the reason Bonnie's alive is because Elena's in a coma, and vice versa. Right. So there's probably a little bit of subconscious resentment going on from Damon. There's some stuff on both sides.
In the final seasons, she was given a friendship with Damon and more screen time, and then she was given a romantic relationship with Enzo, but she was even robbed of that very unnecessarily and tragically, especially considering the other girls like Caroline and Elena did get their one true epic love, but not Bonnie. In season 6, because of the prison world and the trauma she was put through, she actually genuinely tried ending her own life, and the show skims over how she was in such a dark place. And in season 8, she told Caroline she felt so alone that she wanted to die. And this was just another example of Bonnie's pain not being taken as seriously as the other girls. If she did express something, they'd be like, Bonnie, like, don't say that. Oh my God, are you okay? And give her a hug and then just move on. When she goes through really traumatic things like her dad dying, her grandma dying, she doesn't really talk about it. She's forced to just suffer alone. And even her becoming the anchor, that's when I massively noticed there was a problem, because she basically became an anchor to the other side, where she had to feel the pain of all these people dying as they passed through her from the real world onto the other side, like onto death, like the next life. And so she would be the portal for that almost. And so she would feel it every time, and she was in constant pain. And I remember when I found out about that being like, holy moly, that is one of the worst things anyone in the show's ever gone through. And so she learns that she's got this, and then she just disappears for a few episodes. And I was like, oh, where did she go? That's weird. And then she came back and she was like, yeah, so I'm still struggling with being the anchor to the other side. And I was like, whoa, so I completely forgot, because they just removed her for multiple episodes. And the weird thing is how nonchalant she is. She's like, yeah, so is that a mosquito? Oh my God, it's so hot right now. But she's literally like, yeah, this is unfortunately something I'm just gonna have to deal with. I'm gonna have to just pull it together, and yeah, this is just my consequence for making the witches angry. And I was like, are you kidding me? The amount of times let's say she dies, right, and she goes to the other side and only Jeremy knows about it. She's like, Jeremy, it's too late, there's nothing we can do for me. She just gives up on herself. And this also happens a lot, where she'll disappear for long periods of time compared to the other girls. Like for summer break, you won't see her for like 9 episodes, and then she'll come back. And it's very weird because she's not given as much screen time as she should. And the reason why this really doesn't sit right with me is because Bonnie was our main source of representation in the show, played by biracial actress Kat Graham. And therefore they have an extra responsibility to make sure they do right by her for their fans that feel very seen and represented by her. But they use her more as a plot device than as an actual character. She is there purely to serve the needs of the other characters. So let's say a spell goes wrong, they can just grab Bonnie and have her fix it. It's like out of convenience, like she's a helper or an assistant for them. It's like if they don't need her for anything, then her storylines don't matter. And it really came through with even how they treated her witch powers and her abilities. Like sometimes she was really powerful, then she'd be really weak whenever the plot served it. Or in season 1, she was becoming a psychic, and she could sense when bad things were about to happen, or get a bad vibe from someone through touching them, or like know something was about to happen. And then those powers of premonition just disappeared again in season 2, and I was like, oh, okay, so I guess we're not doing that anymore. And season 6, I had a massive problem because Bonnie had already died earlier to save Jeremy and come back to life. And then the same thing in the later seasons is Bonnie and Damon again effectively die, and they're stuck in this alternate prison world together. Basically, like, think of it as like the underworld or the hell or the afterlife or whatever the show tried to paint it as. I don't really know, but that's what it seemed like, is them basically being stuck in this repeating day, and they can't be brought back to life basically. So everyone's treating them like they're dead, and that happened because they were trying to save everyone else first. And eventually even Damon manages to escape, but Bonnie is the one person stuck there, which is interesting to me that they chose to save Damon first over her. And there's like 16 episodes or something insane of her being alone and trying to get out, and it's her that ultimately saves herself, not through anyone else really helping her aside from Jeremy. And when she was stuck in this prison world, she wasn't alone. She was being targeted and harassed by Kai, and he was, I think he stabbed her at one point. He was harassing her, and then she was alone at her birthday and at Christmas, and she was feeling so low because she didn't think she'd ever see the people that she loved again. I was rooting for her so bad, and at that point I was obsessed with her character. I was like, what a baddie, what a baddie. Then she comes back, she saves herself, and I was like, oh my God, and I was so excited. Everyone's reactions were so anticlimactic. Like Damon, he had the appropriate reaction. He ran to her and he like whisked her around. He was more excited to see her than when Elena comes back at the end of the show. I'm not even joking. He was so excited. And I was like, oh my God, you know, I'm so excited. Like Bonnie's back. And everyone else is just like, wow, Bonnie's back. Oh, that's so nice. What? It was so underwhelming. I can't even explain it to you. And another thing was that Jeremy, her main love interest by that point, I was really shipping her with, he had been trying to save her and get her back. He'd been doing everything in his power to see this girl again, and he was in love with her. And he went away for a bit. She comes back. He just doesn't see her. And I was like, are you joking? Are you actually joking? Like, she sent him this message being like, yeah, Jeremy, I'm back, but I just need to like process things and just think things over. What? I don't care if she rejected him a million times. He would still come back to see her and check on her. They wouldn't just leave on that note, especially because he'd been hoping and praying that one day she would return. And it was incredibly anticlimactic that her main love interest wasn't there to receive her with open arms when she got back. And yet no one was checking in on her mental health and how she was doing, considering how low she was before she came back to them. And I was actually really pissed off, to be honest, because when she came back to life, rather than getting emotional support, everyone was basically trying to figure out how they could use her. And Damon was already asking for her help with a spell with dealing with Kai. And I was shocked that they would even be asking anything of her after such a traumatic experience. So the next thing I want to talk about, the next section I'm titling Non-Existent Love Life. So romance is the major selling focal point of the series. Bonnie didn't get a love scene with Jeremy until season 5. And it was in the same episode, I think, that Caroline got a sex scene, so it wasn't really the highlight. And also it was interrupted because she felt someone passing through her to get to the other side, and so she felt some pain, and so it wasn't really the most pleasurable, you know, experience for her because of that, because it was interrupted. That really bothered me, because not only are there long stretches of the show where she goes missing and she deals with constant trauma and everyone she loves dies, but also she can't even really get her own sex scenes. And not only is she gorgeous, the actress, but the writers seem to be going out of their way to remind us that she's not as desirable as the other girls through the way they dress her and through the dialogue. And I don't care what anybody says. People can say, oh, it's a supernatural show, it's actually about Stefan and Damon's relationship. No. This show, the promo materials, the marketing, it plays on the romance. Therefore, the more love interests you have, the more screen time you get, the more seriously you're taken as a character. The whole concept of the show is initially marketed as the love triangle, and the whole idea of history repeating itself, with Elena kind of taking Catherine's place, and maybe that idea that Catherine said of it's okay to love them both, and which brother will she choose, and the ship wars. That is a huge part of the show. There's no point overlooking it. Caroline has multiple love interests who are obsessed with her, even though she's insecure. Elena has multiple people obsessed with her, and that doesn't even include the amount of people that are obsessed with her doppelganger, Catherine. And there's a lot of remarks about her being just really beautiful. And they're all gorgeous. But Kat Graham, who plays Bonnie, is equally stunning. Let's not get it twisted. Yet the show tries to hide it, and they try to even play down her looks through the way that they do her makeup, because she's always the worst dressed out of the girls, and it's like they're trying to almost tone down her sensuality as well as a character. It speaks volumes that a main character in the show like Bonnie isn't given much romantic attention or romantic storylines in a show that primarily focuses on romance amidst other things. It makes a huge statement by them saying everyone gets all this romance all the time, but not Bonnie. You're trying to tell us that she's less desirable, and the implication is she's not here for that. She's here to save the world. She's here to take care of everybody else. She's not here for all the romance stuff. And what bothered me even more is the excuses that the writers and producers make when people ask them, why doesn't Bonnie get with Stefan? Why doesn't Bonnie get with Klaus? Like, when people were asking, because they were thinking, no, they were obviously picking up on it, the excuses the writers give is even more telling, because they say stuff like, yeah, Bonnie wouldn't be interested in someone like that. Why would you want Bonnie to be with like a nasty bad boy? He's not really her type. Or they're like, yeah, Bonnie's too busy, you know, saving the world, and you know, she's too strong, it's just too good for that. That's not an excuse. First of all, we don't really know her well enough to know what her type is. It could be anyone. And also, you have Elena being attracted to bad boys like Damon. You have Caroline being attracted to bad boys like Klaus. Bonnie still deserves her bad boy romance moment, just like the other girls. And this isn't because I'm saying she should be with a toxic love interest that treats her badly, but it just speaks volumes that they don't want her to have that like passionate roller coaster romance like the other girls. And then when she does get an opportunity for romance, let's say it's a black guy, he's just killed off. Or if it's someone that's not black, but she just likes the look of them and starts dating them. Like Ben, she takes this interest in him. You get really excited. Like Ben's the first person she has a romantic interest in. And he's actually a bad guy, so it's never becomes a romance. And he was just using her so he could be with the girl he was actually dating. And he uses it as an opportunity to kind of take advantage of Bonnie for his evil plan. And he even said to her, you know, you shouldn't be so desperate. You made it too easy. Desperate. It's calling her desperate. And actually even Enzo said to Bonnie that she speaks like someone who's never been fought over. So the show is trying to tell us that basically no one's ever really liked her before. And she never really has that epic love. I mean, I loved her relationship with Jeremy, but they really undermined it when they had him cheat on her, because she's the only girl I think in the main cast to be cheated on. And when it came to Enzo, I just could not take that seriously, because he's at first obsessed with Caroline initially, and then he's distracted by Lily and then this other girl, and then eventually Bonnie. So she was never his first choice. And then with Damon, that's when it speaks volumes even more so, because as we know, Damon is like a very flirty sexual guy. He flirts with anything that moves. He slept with Caroline, he slept with these other girls, Rebecca, anyone pretty he's basically going to flirt with. He just flirts with everyone. It really seemed like he was even flirting with Caroline's mother, Liz, at points. Then with Bonnie, even though she's gorgeous, he never really seemed to like be doing that much with her or pursuing her. And when they went to the prison world, I kind of thought something might happen just because they were locked up there together. But I understood he was obviously obsessed with Elena and just wanted to get back to her. But it is very striking to me that they could spend so many episodes together, effectively in isolation, like it may as well have been COVID quarantine, and there's no hint of that romantic spark. And then, you know, the producers and writers keep really pushing in interviews that they're besties. He's all about Elena right now, but he's feeling a really solid friendship with Bonnie and just sort of boxing her in as just a friend. Appreciating the work that Ian and I do together and are seeing that and recognizing that, it really means a lot.
Is that something that you would ever consider doing?
It's so, their friendship on the show is so powerful.
It's just so fun. I don't know, I'm feeling like Damon is still madly in love with Elena.
And I was sad because at points I was really starting to ship her with Jeremy. They had some scenes together where they expressed their love for each other that made me really emotional. That was some of my favorite scenes in the show, and they definitely don't get enough praise. I think they had their good moments. And I also liked how there were times when Bonnie was going to secretly self-sacrifice herself for Elena. I think that was in season 2, episode 17. Yeah, and she read that channeling all this power was going to kill her, but it would save Elena, and she was going to go ahead and do it. Jeremy found out about it and he said, no way, I'm not letting you do that. I'm not letting you die for Elena. Even though Elena's his sister, he was like, I'm not letting you go down to save her. And it felt like he was one of the only people that really stood up for Bonnie and didn't want her to be so self-sacrificing. So it was very disappointing when her and Jeremy never really got proper closure or a send-off for their relationship. And another thing that's very important to point out is that Bonnie in the books was, I think, a redhead, but she had a very passionate relationship with Damon, and they actually got together in the end. So technically, it would be more true to the books if they actually had Bonnie end up with Damon, but they deliberately ignored that. And I do wonder, if Bonnie had been white, would they have had her sleep with Damon or have something romantic with him at some point? Probably, because it seems like every other character, like, you know, Tyler and Caroline, Matt and Caroline, Klaus and Caroline, it seems like everyone hooks up, but then Bonnie's always like left out. The next thing I want to talk about is exclusion and general racism in the show. So all of this speaks of a lot of microaggressions and a lot of ways of just marginalizing her and not doing her justice, basically. So the first thing I want to say is that the Bonnie, Elena, Caroline triangle friendship really started to deteriorate in the later seasons because of how they were excluding Bonnie, and she started to feel like not really a part of the girls' friendship. And so the characters themselves seem to stop really caring about Bonnie's safety. And we keep being told that her and Elena are friends, but most of the friendship seems like Elena talking about herself and offloading onto Bonnie. And Bonnie is then continuously separated from the group through her deaths, like in season 4 or 5, like she dies to save Jeremy and Elena. And season 6 too, she goes into the prison world with Damon. So there's a lot of sections of the show where she's not actually interacting with the girls, and instead it's just Caroline and Elena together, which ultimately makes Caroline and Elena seem like much closer friends, even though initially Bonnie was supposed to be Elena's main best friend. And I think it was especially traumatic to watch around season 4 or 5 when she basically died to save Bonnie and Elena and she becomes a ghost. It was extremely shocking. Jeremy had already died, keep in mind. There was nothing they could do, but she decided to basically swap her life for his, just because she loved him and also because she wanted Elena to be happy again. She deserved a massive thank you for that, because she knew that her death would effectively be potentially permanent, and she just accepted her fate, and it was awful to watch. And what was even more awful was no one really knowing she was dead, and the girls graduating and her just watching from the sidelines and trying her hardest to be happy for them, but they can't see her or hear her. They don't know what's happened to her. And what pissed me off even more is, rather than her wanting them to know what she sacrificed, she kind of lets Jeremy know, look, I'm dead now, and just, yeah, there's no need to worry them. What's done is done. I want them to have a good summer. I want them to be happy, and let's just delay telling them I'm dead for as long as possible. So a whole summer goes by without anyone knowing that she's dead, and it just felt frankly disrespectful to her character, and as if they wouldn't figure out that she was dead. Are they that terrible friends that they wouldn't think to call her or video call her or check in on her in some way? And that exclusion thing happens so many times. Like, I think in episode 3 season 1, really early on, they're at a party, Caroline's with her date, Elena's with her date, and Bonnie's just left alone at the party without a date. There are so many ways that she's sidelined. And then in season 6, when Bonnie and Damon are sent to the prison world, Elena is grieving Damon so much she basically needs drugs to try and cope with it. And there's barely any mentions of her grief for Bonnie, which felt really nasty in a way, because Bonnie had also died too, but most of the emphasis on Elena's grief is on Damon, and there's barely any mention of losing Bonnie. Another thing I didn't like is that Bonnie comes back from the prison world with a cure to vampirism. And she knows that Elena never wanted to be a vampire. So she should have just gone straight to Elena and given her the cure and said, here you go. But she doesn't. She goes to Damon and basically gives him the choice of if he wants to give the cure to Elena or not, leaving Elena's fate in Damon's hands. And Damon's very selfish, so it seemed like a very strange thing for a supposedly best friend to do. And that's the issue, is this isn't just about Bonnie. The show has a racism problem in general. For example, in season 2, Mystic Falls presents a screening of Gone with the Wind in the town square, which is a very problematic movie to watch to this day. And it was interesting, they could have chosen any movie, and they thought that that was a good one to go from. Like, there are other movies about the South you could have chosen, not that one, not a racist movie. And it's also weird that obviously Bonnie's part of the event, so she has to sit and watch it with everyone. Like, why would she want to do that? She wouldn't. And then the show's silence about slavery as well is shocking. For example, they keep doing flashbacks to when they met Catherine, and the year 1864 is mentioned a lot. And they have flashbacks to Emily Bennett, who's Bonnie's ancestor, who's mentioned as being Catherine's handmaiden. But what she actually is a slave, but they're not actually saying that. And they also mention that Damon Salvatore fought for the Confederacy, because it's set in historical 1864 Virginia, but they're not really like going into that and what that means. They're like brushing over it, and they even have like a ton of events to celebrate the founding families, like the Founders Ball, where everyone dresses up in 19th century clothes for the Founders Parade. Why would Bonnie want to be at an event that's celebrating that time when people of color were slaves? Why would she want to show up and be like, yeah, that sounds great? It's no wonder they didn't dress her in costume, and she's there not in costume, because that's not the sort of thing she would want to participate in. But this annoys me so much because they didn't need to set so many flashbacks and events in 1864. They could have chosen a completely different period of time. That was on them. And they didn't need to set the story in Virginia. That again was on them. And like, why? Literally why? Like, that's so tone deaf, it's shocking. And it's just very uncomfortable seeing everyone at this founders parade dressed up in these fancy clothes and celebrating. And another issue I have is how often when they introduce a black person or a black father and son or something, they kill them off as quickly as possible. There was one black guy who was like a side character, like a minor character for an episode, and I was like, oh nice, and then Caroline, I think, ate him. But they have like, yeah, a few Asian characters who just die or are not important. Harper, yeah, Luca and his father who were killed. That guy, is he called Jesse? Caroline dated for a while and then he's killed off. Like, every time they have someone black, they're just killed off. Also, the witches are mostly black. But every time a witch is referenced or like someone goes to them, it's the mostly white vampires like asking the witches for help with something. And another thing I really noticed is that, in terms of this exclusion thing again, is that in so many scenes where the girls dress up and go to an event or a ball and they shine and they look beautiful, Bonnie is not given a fancy dress and she's not invited to the event, even when it doesn't make sense for her to not be there. Like, think of the dance that Elena went to where she kind of danced with Damon for the first time. Bonnie's not really given her shining moment there. And same thing with that really beautiful ball that Esther threw. If anyone should have been at that ball, it should have been Bonnie, because Esther actually, I think, needed to talk to Bonnie to negotiate some witch vampire deal thing, but Bonnie wasn't there. And it was just really odd because Caroline was given this beautiful blue dress by Klaus to go to the ball, and Elena was there in this beautiful dress, and it's like they didn't want Bonnie to like shine too much or look too good, so they try and leave her out of those events. Okay, and let's just talk about Bonnie's deaths now. The moment that I realized the show's quality of writing had done a bit of a dip was in season 4 with the death of Bonnie, when she kind of swapped a life for a life and she replaced Jeremy and brought him back to life, and she sacrificed herself. Of course I was devastated he died. Of course I wanted him to be okay. Obviously, I wanted them to find a way to bring him back, but not if Bonnie had to die in the process. How could no one notice she died? Again, that's insane. A whole summer passes and no one cares. No one thought to call her when her dad was tragically murdered and check up on her and then realize that she was missing. And again, her own death wasn't even really made about her. Look at the funeral. They don't give her like a proper gravestone formal ceremony where they talk about how great she is. Most of it is like her talking about how much she loves them and she's going to miss them, but no one's sitting and really acknowledging what a great friend she was and why she was beautiful and amazing and what she did for everyone else. It's not even a proper send-off for her character. Compare that to the massive, elaborate, huge funeral they had for Liz, Caroline's mother, when she died. And then everyone's crying, they're all leaving her funeral, they're all sad, and they're talking about going off to their futures and basically building a new life, and Bonnie's there watching over them as a ghost. It's very sad. And then Bonnie says to herself and kind of to them, even though they can't hear her, "We'll all be okay. We'll all be okay. Bonnie, you are dead." She would never say that, because, okay, maybe everyone else will be okay. She will certainly not be okay because she's dead. What? I just can't. And of course other characters die in the show and have bad things happen to them. So I'm not saying, oh, she's the only one to die. It's not about that. It's about the way that they approached it. And of course Bonnie wasn't perfect. No one is. I'm not here saying like she's untouchable and like every single thing she did was amazing. And there were some things she really massively messed up. For example, her inadvertently being the cause of Elena's Sleeping Beauty curse, and technically the massacre at the wedding that Kai caused was fueled by Bonnie making Kai angry. So sure, you could argue that sometimes stuff she didn't really think through and it had unintended consequences, but it's nothing compared to some of the bad things that other characters like Damon and Stefan did in the show. But now the final thing that I want to talk about is the treatment of Kat Graham herself and like the racism kind of behind the scenes. So the problem is that it's not just Bonnie as this fictional character that's being treated badly, because you could argue, well, she's a fictional character. The issue is it was all stemming from, I think, the way that Kat Graham herself was perceived and the way she was treated, even subconsciously or subtly. For example, Kat Graham is a very talented singer and performer, and we never have her perform on the show, which is very strange because they could have worked her into the backgrounds of party scenes or just found a way to include her, and they don't. And yet they have other characters like Caroline performing much more regularly. Her outfits and clothes and hair are very unflattering. They also have her straighten her hair and wear all these wigs. And I didn't know they were wigs at first when I was younger, and I remember I'd watched an episode or two of the show, but there's an interview, I think, with Vogue where Kat Graham's talking about how she was forced to wear wigs and how it made her sad because she wanted to have her natural afro on display and she wanted to be in touch with her true identity. And it feels like basically your identity is being rejected when you're trying to wear your natural hair on a show and proudly show it off, and you're being told that you can't. And I know it was mentioned that they really wanted to actually remove Bonnie from the show, but they only kept her around because they had to, or because they were worried about the outrage from the fans. And Kat Graham was convinced, she mentioned in interviews, that they just couldn't wait to kill her off.
I don't know, maybe they just want to kill me off the show.
No, because if they wanted to kill you off, you'd be gone. They've had a million chances, but you're always back. Which
they might have a fan backlash, but I don't know. I think they probably just want to kill me. See if they can get away with it.
There is absolutely no.
But they weren't. And if she felt like that, it's because she felt like probably they were excluding her or didn't really want her to be there. And apparently she was meant to leave in the middle of the last season, or that she was fired. It was just speculation, but that Ian Somerhalder, who played Damon, did not tolerate, and he basically said, if you fire her, I will leave the show. And normally I'd say, well, who knows if that's true, but I would not be surprised if it was true, because I've seen interviews, I've seen YouTube compilations, I've seen clips, and I do not like the way the producers and writers speak to her when they all come into interviews together, like Julie Plec and Caroline Dries. Yeah, that's their names. I don't like the way they speak to her, and I don't like a touchy way of, oh, I'm sensitive, I don't like it. But if you watch it, just their body language, the way that they look at her is very cold. And of course, you know, you can be caught in a bad moment or just have a resting bitch face like me sometimes, and it's misconstrued as rude, but it's in multiple interviews where they're looking at her with just a bit of distaste, or she says something like she thanks the fans for something, or she says that, you know, she likes the idea of being shipped with a certain character. And then rather than them letting her have her moment, Caroline Dries will, especially Caroline, will interrupt her and be like, yeah, no, but like whatever, and change the subject and just contradict what she's saying continually. Like at one point, Kat Graham's thanking everyone for the support on the Damon-Bonnie friendship and their platonic chemistry and how they've been, you know, nominated for an award for on-screen chemistry, and she's just been grateful. And Caroline's just sat there kind of judging her, and she's like, oh yeah, but you know, actually, as we all know, Damon really wants to be with Elena. Sorry about missing out on your award. And it's just this little snide comment that does not land well. And then in an interview, Caroline says, so nastily, Bonnie is still alive because Elena's in a coma.
The reason Bonnie's alive is because Elena's in a coma.
And that's so rude, and you can see how upset Kat Graham is hearing that, because what she's actually saying is the only reason why we're keeping you as an actress on the show is because Nina Dobrev had stuff going on and she left, and so we've got to keep you on. Otherwise, we would have gotten rid of you if we could have. It is nasty. It was not needed. It was just completely not okay to say. And actually, Kat once did a meet and greet in Brazil, and she started crying because the fans were being so nice to her, which shows again that she felt very kind of unappreciated overall, or surprised maybe that people liked her, especially because there were a lot of fans of the show who were tweeting or posting things that were very racist towards her. And Kat Graham's co-star Matthew Davis, who plays Alaric Saltzman, said on Twitter, are Jewish people upset about Bonnie's treatment too? So he was basically disregarding the way that Bonnie was treated and the way that Kat Graham was treated, and saying that it's probably not because of her Jewish background. And him saying that was just really weird, and he's again like ignoring the problem, saying basically you guys are wrong, no one's being racist here, and dismissing what she was experiencing. It wasn't a necessary tweet. And there's been that same just dismissal of issues with Julie Plec as well. Nothing to do with the show, but just her as a big part of the show, as a co-creator of the Vampire Diaries, right? Because she replies to Megan Thee Stallion's tweet about black women being unprotected, and because she'd been shot at basically and hospitalized. And it was just really sad, and you should just offer support. And Julie Plec's tweet basically was diminishing Megan's trauma and basically saying black women will save us all and don't worry about it. And so if we before had any doubts about what we were picking up on, this tweet confirms that she is racist, because she tweeted and she confirmed, I believe black women are going to save us all, and I'm so sorry to put that pressure on you, but white women are continually failing all of us. I hope you understand that me seeing you as a hero is not meant to add to your anxiety, rather it's to lift you up and celebrate you. Like, honestly, not every thought is meant to be tweeted. Like, that was just really badly worded and awful. I just don't like it. Like, I don't like any of it, and I know that she was the one who probably wanted to boot Kat from the show, if that's true. The good news is that while speaking with Entertainment Tonight, Kat Graham revealed that she always felt like she had someone in power to talk to about any issues, including higher-ups in the CW. And she said, I've had a lot of support in terms of awareness of writers, producers, directors, and I've been able to communicate any sort of racism or marginalization or tokenism I might have experienced, whether on that show or in other projects that I've dealt with. But she's always kind of implied that she was dealing with something, because she mentioned in another interview that she'd always picked up on maybe, like, let's say, black actors not being given an opportunity to speak on something or say a certain line audition, and she'd wondered, what's that about, basically, and she'd thought, that's strange, but she kind of put it together more when she was on the Vampire Diaries, and it was very, like, subtly worded, but her saying that basically alludes to the fact that she noticed there was a problem with how she and others were being treated when she started the Vampire Diaries. So even though she's very classy with the way she's dealt with it, she's obviously saying there was some kind of problem. And it just makes me sad, because I know there's a lot of, I'm going to talk about it in other videos, but I know there's a lot of problem with the actor who plays Alaric Saltzman because of other things he's said regarding political views and tweets he made, and that comment, which was just like uncalled for. But I've mentioned this before, but I don't like the way that they speak to her in interviews. It's uncomfortable, and even though we don't know exactly what's going on, because they're just clips that could be taken out of context, her body language very much implies that she's uncomfortable, or they almost, like, at points, Caroline Dries kind of embarrasses her a little bit, because Bonnie, like, says thank you for something, and then Caroline undermines her, and so Kat Graham's then sort of forced to kind of explain herself and justify what she meant, so she's not looking bad or embarrassed. And it's just not a very comfortable watch. And she often mentions that she doesn't think the writers go easy on Bonnie, or there's no way that they would go easy on her. So you can tell that she thinks Bonnie is unnecessarily being put through stuff as a character. So overall, Bonnie deserved better, and I felt like she was frankly too good for her friends to be sacrificing that much for them. And Kat Graham is a great actress. She really sold me on many of her scenes, her emotional scenes, her crying scenes, even her just casting spells. It was all very, very believable, and that show really needed her. But they keep telling us that she's strong and that she's brave and that she's powerful and that she needs to be strong. But it really undermines it when a majority of the show is her just kind of following other people's orders and being pushed into things that she doesn't want to do. Bonnie has also been criticized for being a vampire hater. And yes, she took her hatred of vampires too far in the first few seasons. But again, other characters in the show have done way worse, and people forget that Matt carried that same hatred of vampires to the point that he wanted to kill them in a later season, and no one actually gives him the same amount of hate that they give Bonnie, when both of them had the same reactions, especially because both of them were perfectly justified to be apprehensive towards vampires. So even that I can't really hold against Bonnie fully. even though she really messed up at points and she did the wrong thing, and she, let's say, I remember in season 1 she hurt vampires, she was happy to leave them and let them die, and it wasn't okay of her. But it's just hard for me to be mad at her when other characters in the show like Stefan and Damon have been literal serial killers and like repeat offenders. She always learned, she always evolved, such as her becoming friends with Damon. It showed that she was open to changing her mind and learning. And yeah, of course she did things where she didn't really think about the consequences, but that doesn't make her like a bad character. I felt like she was one of the best characters, and I just wish they'd allowed her, like if I had written it, I just would have given her more happy moments, given her a more highlighted more her sexual desirability, given her a love interest that actually survived and lasted, and a happy love story, because that's what she deserved. And she really needed more of her own stuff going on, where it wasn't just about like casting a spell to help people that put her at risk, because it does not land well when you do that. But let me know your thoughts on our lovely Bonnie in the comments. And yeah, hashtag Bonnie fan. I just really like her. Can you tell I just really like her? She's just cool. I'm a fan. And I will see you guys for the next video. Mwah.